All right, welcome back to another episode of Cork'd Up. We don't have a guest today because we have a lot to unpack. And it was funny because let's introduce ourselves first. Sorry, I'm so excited. I'm Jessica Kleinschmidt.
I'm Rachel Luba. Cheers.
And cheers. And the reason why we don't have a guest this time around is because I was casually asking Rachel the other day, because I wrote an article on Matt Chapman, and Scott Boras too. And we talked about arbitration. Of course, I've been covering arbitration for years, but I still want to know so much more about it. And so I casually asked Rachel, and she's like, we should record this. And then it turned into, let's do it on the next podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about today, with our wine word being what, Rachel?
It is hashtag arbitration.
Yeah, so we know how today's gonna pan out. But before we get into the arbitration stuff, something that happened just last night, we're recording this today on Tuesday, and Fernando Tatis Jr., who is single-handedly making the Padres relevant, he swung for the fences on a 3-0 count while the Padres were up by a lot of runs against the Rays. Yeah,
they were up by 7 runs in the 8th inning, I believe, and he hit a grand slam. So naturally, the old men of the world, the old white men of the world, yelled at the clouds, and they were pissed off about it. So for me, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for 1 second only, and I don't agree with it, but I understand why people would be upset. I've never pitched in the bigs before, but I could see why somebody would be peeved if you're swinging for the fences on a 3-0 count and you're up by all these runs. So that's where the controversy sets in. I don't agree with it. I think. Well, and the words, I guess, that Woodward used, right, the manager for the Rangers, was that there's just kind of these unwritten rules. And that's not how he was raised to play. And that's where, like, I get frustrated, because I just feel like it's a microcosm of everything that's wrong with baseball right now. And the fact that and then let's remember, Tatis Jr. then apologizes, basically,
right, and
said, like, for doing it, and basically says that, they're like, it's a learning experience, and, I guess next time I'll take a pitch.
Right. And that kind of makes you think, right? Now we're putting this fear into their eyes. And I respect the unwritten rules. It's me personally, I tried to find a balanced line of old school, respecting that, and embracing the bat flips and stuff like that. And it's difficult because we have people saying this and that. However, Tatis Jr. should not have apologized for. Like I said, he's the reason why the Padres are relevant, and he's so fun. Like, even beyond, like, just in the dugout, he's dancing and he's having fun. He's being flashy and he's, like, sexying up baseball, and he's blinging himself out, and people are making stickers of him because he's so unique looking, and he's a minority, and that's the best part about it all. And we saw a lot of players reacting to it. Trevor Bauer, of course, reacted to it, and people in the media reacted. A lot of players reacted to it, and they were pro what he did. And even Trevor Bauer as a pitcher said it was fine. You know what I mean? So that's interesting.
Well, to me, the problem is, I understand. First of all, I am all for bat flips. I am all for, showing emotion out there, because I personally think that's what makes it exciting to watch. So, I understand there's these unwritten rules about, you don't bat flip and things like that, which, I disagree with. I think it's great, and it's great for the game. But if you, want to sit there and, shake your head at a player that bat flips, okay, like, I can understand, I guess, where you're coming from. But I have a problem when you're asking a player to sacrifice an opportunity to help his team win, to, pad his stats, because these things matter. And, a bat flip, whether you bat flip or not, it's never going to impact your contract, or your, how much money you make, your stats, your team winning. It won't. So it's just like this respect thing. So, okay, I can understand the argument, but I have a problem when you're asking a player to, out of respect, just take a pitch.
Right.
To me,
you're going to tell a player who got to where he is being ridiculously an athlete mind full of adrenaline saying, don't take it. Mind you, I cover the A's. Last week alone, they had a bunch of walk-off scenarios where you need insurance runs in some of these situations, right? Because baseball's fucking weird. If you're down by a few runs, you could easily still lose that game. The Giants blew a lead, a 7-2 lead. And if they didn't have a grand slam in that scenario, what would have happened?
Right.
That's like a compliment to the opposing team. Like, y'all could come back. Never know.
Yeah. I would be offended if I were a pitcher and you're going to sit there because we're down and you're just going to go easy on me. And I think this is like a good kind of segue into, talking about salary arbitration, because to me, when it really bothers me, I was listening this morning to Mad Dog on High Heat, my favorite. I love his takes, but he sat there and he basically, ridiculed Tatis Jr. for what he did and then said it was a meaningless grand slam. And that bothered me. And that bothered me as an agent, because I have been in salary arbitration negotiations and hearings. I've done like 26 of them. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, every single home run, every single RBI, every single stat matters. Like, I have watched teams go in there and they distinguish two comparable players and saying, you're not worth this much because this guy has 33 home runs and you only have 29. Like, that matters. And that could be the difference of $1 million. It could be the difference of $250,000, whatever it is, but that matters. And so to sit there and say that because in this situation, you were already up by, a bunch of runs, I can assure you that in a salary arbitration hearing, let's say it's another player, when Tatis goes through arbitration and another player's at hearing and they're trying to say that we're worth this much, and the other team will bring in Tatis and say, look, he hit this many more home runs. They're not going to go there and say, well, this home run was hit in this, when the team was up this much, so it doesn't really count.
Right. It's not by scenario. It's the numbers are there.
Every home run. And they will say, you're not worth as much as him because he has this many more home runs than you. Yeah. Like, it all matters. And so to sit there and argue that it's a meaningless grand slam, it's eyewash. I hate it.
And I agree. And as we all know, when you have a 3-0 count, what pitch is coming. You're going to get a fastball down the dick, and what pitch is about to come. So that's the thing, right? And we're going to segue into arbitration because that is such an important thing to talk about. Because, like I said, I was covering this Matt Chapman story. I had to aggregate from it, and Alex Coffey from The Athletic spoke to Scott Boras, who is Matt Chapman's agent, and being able to cover Chappie for a living is such a treat. And he's, of course, on the A's along with Matt Olson. His arbitration is going to be interesting coming up because he's still underneath team control. And I say all these things sometimes and I'm writing it and I'm like, well, wait, I want to make sure my reader understands this, but I can't go into detail about arbitration every single time. And so when you and I wanted to talk about this, I'm glad we brought this in, especially during this time of the season and knowing it's in a shortened season. So the first question I kind of wanted to bring up, Rachel, and I know you know this, is how would you define arbitration? And I made the joke, like, explain it to me like I'm 5, but how would you define that to like a casual baseball fan, say their favorite players on their way toward arbitration, and you hear that as a fan, what should you know about the term arbitration, how it could affect your favorite player?
Yeah, so I guess to just kind of explain what it means when a player is arbitration eligible, basically, so you have a team controls you when you get drafted. They control you for 6 years in the big leagues before then you become a free agent. So you have to accrue. So every single day that you're in the big leagues, you get 1 day of service. You have to hit 107. You have to get 172 days in order to get a full year of service. Mm-hmm. After 6, once you hit 6 years, you're a free agent, right? And you can sign with any team. We all know what free agency is.
Right.
The first 3 years that the team controls you. So when you have less than 3 years of service, so all those days that add up to less than 3, the team gets to unilaterally decide what to pay you. Now, they can literally pay you whatever they want. However, right, there is a minimum. It's around $560,000 right now. So I would say probably like 99% of guys that have less than 3 years of service are paid the minimum. Sometimes a little more. Like the year before Mookie Betts was an arbitration eligible player, he got like $900,000 because the team, you know, he was really good. And
I was going to say, so there's possibilities where, I mean, I'm of course an A's person, where they're like, hey, we respect you, let's add some more money onto that.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, you'll never really see it be like even $1 million. Gotcha. It'll just be like, you know, another
$1 million though.
And even, yeah, but even that is rare. So for the most part, you get about basically the minimum. Yeah. And they can, it's their choice. You have no say, and they own you, and they pay you whatever they want. Then once you hit 3 years of service, now you're still under team control for 3 more years until you hit the 6. But for those 3 years, you get to negotiate your salary. So you get to decide, you get to come to an agreement and prove what you're worth. And so those are your salary arbitration eligible years. So the way that we value players in arbitration is very different than the free agent market. You're still getting them for way under value, like market value, because it's this really complex, kind of stagnant, silly system that we use, but you get to negotiate it. So for those 3 years, you negotiate your salary. However, they still own you. They still control you. You cannot negotiate it with any other team. It's just, so we take, you know, Matt Chapman, he's still owned by the A's, but now they don't get to unilaterally decide what to pay him. For 3 years, he gets to negotiate a salary. Now, every year, it's usually like the second week in January on a Friday at like 1. It's the deadline, the filing deadline. The teams and the player have to come to an agreement on the negotiated salary for that year by that deadline. If they don't, they file numbers. They file numbers and they go to hearing. And when you file numbers, you basically, I say, I'm worth this. The team says, we're filing at this number. We're only going to pay you this amount. Let's say it's the difference of, I file at 2 million, you file at, or let's say I file at 3 million, the team files at 1 million. You go to hearing and you put on a case in front of a panel of arbitrators. So there's 3, and you argue why you're worth 3 million, right? I would say my agents and the union are going to say, I'm worth 3 million because look at all these players in the past that were in my position. They were paid that much, and I'm not good. And the team will do the opposite. Then they'll go and make their case about why, no, you look more like these players that are only worth 1 million, or that we're only paid 1 million, and you should be paid, 1 million. And the 3 arbitrators will have 24 hours to decide, and they will return a salary for you. And it's one or the other. There's no in between. They pick one salary. They either pick the team or they pick yours. And when you're making your case, all you have to prove, like for me to say I'm worth 3 million, all I have to do is prove that you take the midpoint. So which would be 2 million, right? That's in between the 1 and the 3. You have to prove that you're worth a penny above 2 million. And all the team has to prove is that you're worth a penny below. They don't actually have to prove you're only worth 1 million, just that you're only a penny either below the midpoint, or you would prove you're a penny above the midpoint. And then the arbitrators they make a decision, either the team or the player. And whichever they decide, it's that salary. So if I filed at 3, if they decide for me, I get paid 3 million. They can't pick anything in between, which is different than hockey, because hockey arbitration, they can pick numbers in between. But they basically make a decision. The panel, the people that are deciding this are, like, the best way I describe it is like your grandma and grandpa. They're labor arbitrators. They've been doing this for years. They don't know baseball very well. They've over the years have learned kind of what ERA is. They understand that, but they're labor arbitrators. So all they know, basically what's important to them is, did you show up for work? Did you do a good job? Like that kind of thing.
So I was going to ask that. So beyond just the ERA, the batting average, the numbers, other stuff goes into it because the panel, the numbers aren't everything.
So, right. So the weird part about arbitration is, and it confuses people, is we base it off of these very antiquated stats. Like, first of all, I mean, wins and losses still kind of matter. Innings pitched, like the amount of innings that you pitch matters for a panel.
So pitcher wins don't matter unless it has to do with arbitration. We're going to go with that.
Exactly.
Cool.
So it matters. So when you say like a starting pitcher qualified, he had 162 innings at least, because that's enough to qualify for the ERA title. For a hitter, he has to have 502 plate appearances, right, to qualify for a batting title. So that threshold is huge. Like that's a massive distinguisher in the market of these guys. Basically, it means you were a everyday player versus not if you don't hit 502 plate appearances or if you don't have 162 innings. So things like that it's all these old stats that basically front offices do not use at all to actually value players on the open market. But in arbitration, you have to make these kinds of arguments. And that's kind of how, that's how it works, unfortunately.
So are some of these things cherry picked? Like, you mentioned wins and stuff. So say, for instance, I'm always thinking about Matt Chapman because you cannot not say he's not one of the best. He's, in my the best defensive third baseman. So you compare him to the Nolan Arenados of the world. Anthony Rendon just got a fat contract. So it's really difficult for me to sit there and think of somebody who's on this panel saying, I'm like, are you crazy? And that's just them saving money?
Yeah, so the problem is you can only compare Chapman to if he's going to be a first-time eligible player. You're separated into classes. So there's your first time, your second time, and your third time. And the way it works is it's almost like seniority. The more times you go through, the more service you have, you're worth more. It doesn't matter, even though, we can make an argument that a guy like Aaron Judge or Cody Bellinger was worth more than just some, kind of average player, average hitter going through arbitration for the third time. Chances are the guy going through the third time is going to make more because that's just kind of how you move along in the market. So Matt Chapman can only compare himself to other similar players, basically, that were first-time eligible players as well, and what they got paid. And you usually only want to go like 2 to 3 years back. So you don't want to take a player from, 10 years ago and compare him to a guy from 10 years ago. So you usually try to just do like the most relevant is the guys that are in your current class and what did they get?
Got it.
And then the second you would go back, if there's no one that's relevant in your class, you take guys from a year before or, 2 or 3, and you make an argument that you're like them. But that's why it's so stagnant, because you're constantly comparing back like a few years. So the market doesn't move. Because you never have, unless you have guys like Mookie who goes to hearing and gets a record-breaking, contract in arbitration because he moves the market. Because no player has ever gotten that much before. But those are rare. Like, you have to go to hearing and win to move the market usually.
So how would it differ between what usually happens in like a 60-game season?
It's going to be so different this year, and they're going to have to change. They're going to have to adjust everything. And these players this year, it sucks for them, honestly, because basically all the players this year, whatever they get, it's going to be really hard in future years to use them as comps, like comparable players, because it won't really make sense because we have this weird 60-game season. So it sucks for, future generations, because what if a guy like Chapman could get a really big contract or, you know, do really well in arbitration, and then, you know, a younger guy coming up wants to use that, like he won't be able to use Chapman's contract. The other problem is it's going to just optically, it's going to look like no matter what you do and no matter how you kind of adjust it, at the end of the day, the teams will argue to the panel, look, they only played 60 games though. So like they're not worth this much. And I think that's a good, like, another good thing to touch on is that when in arbitration, the way you get paid based on your prior performance. So what you're going to do next year, completely irrelevant. The only time that what is going to happen next year is relevant is if you're injured. And like Sean Manaea, for example, if he has, they call it the existence of a pre-existing defect, that's what it's called. If you have that, meaning like it means you're going to be injured basically to start the next season, that crushes your value a little bit. Like that's taken into consideration.
That's like a dark cloud over his head, just always going to be there.
Yeah.
They probably hardcore use that against him.
Right. Well, it's only for the next season. So if for the next season he won't be ready to start, then his value plummets. But other than that, anything you're going to do, like you can never, ever make an argument that, look, he's projected to do this next year. He's going to be this good. All that matters is what you did the prior year. That's the most important. And then your career matters too. It matters more your first time in arbitration. And then the second time, the biggest thing is like your prior season, which is called your platform year. So that's really what matters. But there are other things that go into it, like, you know, I mean, it's one, length and consistency of your career. So how consistent were you? What was your path? Like getting called up, did you get sent down? It really hurts you if you get optioned. That's a big deal. So like the consistency and kind of length trajectory of your career, your platform year. So how good was this most recent year? That's big. And then trends. It's really bad if you start off well and finish poorly. Horrible. You would much rather, you want to start
work your way up.
Yeah, that's it. You will get paid more if you're trending like that in a season.
I guess that makes sense because you look more valuable. That means you can kind of improve.
Right.
And that's probably going to fuck you up in a 60-game season then.
Right, because a lot of these guys don't get there are players for sure that are going to have the advantage of there are some players out there that always start off really strong and decline. They're going to have the advantage this year of that won't be an issue. Like they'll just, because, you know, they'll probably just play strong through 60 games. However, there are also plenty of players that start off slow and, you know, they heat up and they do really well. And that gives them a big bump in arbitration. And now they're not, you know, like they might only have their, you know, the shittier performance to kind of go off of. So it's going to mess it up in a lot of ways. The other thing is like, you know, if you're the team, you're going to make the argument, look, like he was great, but at the end of the day, we can't pay him like, you know, we paid Mookie Betts or something because he only played 60 games. And, you know, that's the reality of it. So he still wasn't as valuable as what Mookie was. But then it's going to matter. So let's say he gets paid, let's say $2 million, I'm just throwing out numbers, less than what Mookie got when he was a first time. Then for his second time, you have to take the starting point of the salary where you came from the year before. So that matters. So if you're coming from 2 million less, it's a lot harder to even catch up to Mookie your second year because you're coming from 2 million below. And so the higher you get up in the salary structure is what we call it, the bigger the raises for the same caliber of performance. So if you have two guys who have the exact same performance, but one guy is coming from $1 million and one guy is coming from 5 million, the guy from 5 million will get a bigger raise like the next year compared to the 1 million, which is like weird, but.
So one scenario that I've always been curious about is when a player gets DFA'd, whether they want to perhaps get, I guess, demoted down to AAA or elect for free agency, those scenarios. What kind of a conversation is that between you and a client where they're like, hey, do you take a look at the free agency market? Like when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado were free agents, do you think Machado would have, like, I mean, depending on the scenario, of course, does it depend on the market? And I know the market, you can compare it to like buying a house, if you will, and everything like that. So what's a conversation from a client and an agent, like, hey, I really want to elect for free agency, but it may not be of a caliber of Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, but somebody of less, you know.
So, yes. So when you're when you're still under 6 years of service and you elect, or you become a free agent or you get DFA'd, right? It is not the same at all as being a true free agent. Because here's the thing. What it means is the team, you weren't even valuable, and you weren't as valuable as what the team would have to pay you in salary arb. Because the way the salary arbitration like works is you can't really you can only get a pay cut of, it's like 20% of your salary from the prior year. That's all they are allowed to do. So even if you don't pitch let's say you don't pitch a single inning, or you don't take a single, you don't have a single plate appearance, you will usually get the exact same salary you got the year before. It's very, very rare ever, unless maybe you didn't pitch at all or you didn't play at all, and then you were going to be injured for the next year. There's a chance you might get a 20% pay cut. But other than that, you're going to have to get at least the same, if not a slight raise. So what it means is if they DFA'd you, or if they choose, there's the tender deadline, which is usually in the like 1st or 2nd of December.
Where they ask you about tenders. I love the tenders.
Yes. So the tender deadline is basically, right, they control you for, like I said, 6 years. However, once you get to the 3rd year where you're arbitration eligible, they decide to tender you a contract or not, meaning they plan on keeping you basically. And then if they tender you, which most will get tendered, then you negotiate your salary arbitration contract. If they don't tender you, they're basically saying, yeah, like you're not worth whatever it's going to be in arbitration, so we're just going to let you go. What that means is, though, if you get let go, you're like what you were going to get in arbitration, you're not going to get that on the free agent market, which is why they let you go. So you're never going to be better off, usually, like becoming a free agent.
Yeah. And I think of a scenario like a Blake Trinan when it happened with the A's, and he was non-tender, which was kind of surprising. But it was a thing, he was declining toward the end of his contract, and he hit the free agency market and he ended up with the Dodgers. But Trinan, went from having a negative ERA almost to having a lot of issues, and he was no longer the closer. Liam Hendricks took over that situation, but he was non-tendered. But I think he ended up better off with the Dodgers. But so that was a kind of an interesting scenario, and that's when I really geeked out over non-tender, because like, why is Blake Trinan not getting this stuff? But
because
yeah,
I don't remember his exact salary. I did help. I know in his arbitration case when he won, because he won it the year before this last year, right? So I don't remember exactly what his salary was, but basically the A's looked at it and they were like, okay, from wherever he was in the market, what they paid him the year before, they would have to increase it a little bit, but he was just, maybe they didn't see any value in him. Like they didn't think he was at all valuable enough to pay him anywhere around that, right? So instead they just non-tendered him. And so now he signs a contract, but with the Dodgers. What he got with the Dodgers was probably less than what he would have gotten in arbitration. Or it was just that maybe it was right around the same, but the A's were just like, for us, for our team, we have enough players. We have guys like Liam Hendricks who can close for cheaper.
Yeah, and Diekman was coming back too. So exactly. I get that. Yeah. So
if they have, it happens a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't mean that the player isn't as valuable, but what happens is sometimes teams have younger guys that are still at the minimum that are going to be cheaper that can do the same job. So they'll just say, we don't want to pay. We already have 2 guys who can do your job who are only making $550,000. So we're going to non-tender you, and you might make someone will pay you what you're worth in arbitration. Another team will, but they just don't think it's worth it because they have guys for cheaper who could do it.
It's like Moneyball.
Yes, exactly.
That's so cool. But it makes sense because I mean, I hate the term value because obviously I'm emotional about it, but that doesn't mean they don't value you monetarily. It's a different scenario because when you attach money to it doesn't necessarily mean you're not valued. It's just monetarily.
The problem, so as an agent, the reason I hate arbitration, I don't think the process is bad, where you negotiate a salary and all of that. But the reason I don't like it, I don't like how we have to value players. I don't like that some of our best players, some of the best talent that we have on the diamond are making the minimum. And then once they start to get more expensive, then they just get rid of them and they're like, well, we don't want to pay you anymore. And because we'll just get the younger talent for cheaper, which is why I think, you should value these guys closer to their true market value, or let them become free agents and go on the open market when they're younger and don't control them for so many years.
Yeah, obviously like just the team that I cover, it's just so interesting to think about. And
your team is notorious for not wanting to pay.
Yeah. And so, and the reason why I like that is because I have learned so much over the years from it. And so when I do see the Blake Trinan situation, I was like, he got like a pretty good amount of money with the Dodgers, but that was still a little bit too much than what the A's are willing to pay. So it's just interesting from that.
Right, because the A's looked at it and they were like, if Diekman's coming back, we have Liam Hendriks, they're going to be cheaper. Why would we pay? And, if Trinan was declining that season, why would we pay that much? And the A's they're one of those teams, the Rays as well, that they don't want to pay if they don't have to.
That's interesting. Now, these negotiation scenarios, these hearings, what's a hearing like in those, like from when you walk in, because I know it's like crack for you, you love that, but what's it like when you walk in there from when you leave?
Yeah, so you walk in and there's like, I don't know, 20, 30 people in this, they're in hotel, like it's in a hotel. You live in this hotel for like a month, at least when I was at the union, because you're doing every single case. And you walk in, everyone shakes hands. You go, it's like you do the line of the handshake. Oh,
what are they going to do this year? Are they going to stand 6 feet apart?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, probably. But so you do the handshake. It was always awkward for me because guys didn't know if they should like hug me or not because I was a girl. So that part was always weird.
I would make it so uncomfortable I'd like run up to you and jump on you and then walk away and then just leave. Yeah.
So you have the team comes in. A lot of times the team, it's like they have 1 or 2 representatives for the team. Then you have the LRD, which is the labor relations department. They are the like lawyers at the commissioner's office. So they oversee all the teams in arbitration, and the union oversees all the players in arbitration. And they very much control what's happening, both sides. Whereas the free agent market, it's supposed to be a free market. No one's supposed to control anything. But arbitration is very different. So you walk in, so you have the LRD, so the commissioner's office, you have the teams, you have the player is there. The player is there personally. You have an agent, your agent there, and you have the union there. And then you have the 3 panelists that are on the case. And there's like a pool of 30 or whatever that we set up the schedules, like the union, the commissioner's office, and it's a whole thing about the panelists that you have. But you have 3 panelists. You go, you do the whole handshake, then everyone sits down at a conference table. The panelists are on the head of the table, all 3 of them. Then the player is sitting closest to them on one side, and then the agent and the MLBPA. Then you have the team on the other side and the LRD, so the commissioner's office. The judges do, or the panelists do their little intro. Everyone's been through it, though, on at least the commissioner's office and the MLBPA. Like, you've heard it a million times. They do the intro, and then you swap books of like your exhibits of your case. And then when you do that, basically more than half the room gets up and leaves. So it'll be like the commissioner's office gets up and leaves. The MLBPA will get up and leave, and they go back to their offices in the hotel, and they go back to their offices and start picking apart the other side's case and creating their rebuttal. While that's going on, the player goes first, and they have an hour to give their argument.
The player actually speak, or do they have a representative?
They have their agent or like an attorney that will do it for them. So, and the player just has to sit there, and we have to give them all the.
But they have the right, the opportunity. If they wanted to speak for themselves, would they do it?
Yeah, it's usually the only time. Like, it's happened a few times where sometimes the team will say that they're injured, they have the existence or pre-existing defect, and we will have under oath. Will like swear in the player, and they will testify that they are healthy and that there is no, injury. That's yeah. So that's the only time they will speak. But we have to give them like the whole rundown of, you can't dip in the hearing. You need to wear a suit. You have to look engaged. We've had players like fall asleep in the middle, which
you lost me at not having a lipper in. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. No.
Yeah, you gotta have the nicotine gum or whatever.
Yeah.
But so you'd be surprised some of the things that we have to tell. But you want the player to understand that you want the panelists. They're sitting right next to the panelists. You want the panelists to feel like this is important to you. This matters. Like, you care about this. If you fall asleep in the middle, they're like, what are we doing? Like, you don't care.
Fallen asleep before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyways, the player gives their argument for an hour. There's a 5-minute break. Then the team goes. Then the team gives their argument for an hour. Then you get up and everyone takes a break for 30 minutes. And everyone goes back to their respective offices. But the MLB, like the commissioner's office and the union, were already working this entire time creating a rebuttal. So you go back, you have a 30-minute break, and then you resume back in the room, and now everybody's back in there. The MLBPA, the commissioner's office, and now you do rebuttal. And the rebuttal is basically saying, so now you have 30 minutes, each side has 30 minutes to give their rebuttal. And the MLBPA is going to make the argument, or like the player side, why the team's comparable players that they used are not relevant. And that that their universe that they created is not the accurate universe to basically value this player in. And then you have the other side. The other side will give the same thing. They'll give their argument of why yours is not relevant. And then after that, basically so then they do their rebuttal, and then it's over. And you shake hands, and they'll tell you, the other side, the team will tell the player, hey man, it's just business, we're sorry, blah, blah, blah. And then like, it's over, and that's it. And
every time I leave a date, like, this is just business.
Just business. So, no offense. But look, for the most part, players don't get that upset because
I feel like they know, right? Like they're attached to this number. So yeah.
They're like, buddy, I lived through it. I know how I performed. I know my numbers. They're never usually surprising. The only time, and it's happened, and I have seen it get heated. I've seen sides yell. I've seen people storm out of the hearing.
Have you seen like a table flip or anything?
I have seen someone throw down a bunch of papers, scream, get up, scream, and storm out.
That's hot.
So the only it's a bunch of men that are heated.
Yeah.
But I have seen, look, like it happens where there are just really shady things that the team will do or say. Trevor in one of his hearings, and he ripped them on social media for it. He said, look, like this is it's supposed to be about my performance, not just a character assassination. And that's what they tried to make it. They tried to just say, you shouldn't pay this guy because he's a bad person. And look, like, that's not what this is about. Like, it's basically—
And that's weird because so leading up to it, it's never about this person, but Trevor, who has a certain personality, now they drag the character into it, right? That's weird. That's so fucked up.
Yeah. So there's
how I mean, because I watch a lot of true crime, obviously. This is not the same thing, but people dig into your past, right? Like, oh, what happened to you 10 years ago? Do people still do that when it comes to this stuff?
No. The only time that character is really brought up
is if you're Trevor Bauer.
Right. So the way I'll explain how Trevor's was used was after his first year the first time he went, it was his second time through arbitration, he won. And he wanted the number that he wanted to file at was like the 420 stuff.
420, yeah.
So, but because, I
knew I loved him.
Yeah. He was convinced he was told you cannot like do that and file at that. So he basically, like, there was an article written that Passon wrote of him taking the difference of what the amount he actually wanted, which was less than what he actually got, and the amount that he won, and donating it to charity. And that's where the 69 days of giving started.
Right.
And so he was doing 69 days of donating this difference in money. And he commented in it about how the arbitration process is very antiquated and that it's kind of like, he thinks it's a little silly. And he's not wrong. Like, there's a lot that's very antiquated with it. However, even when I read that, because I was working at the union at the time, I remember getting a little frustrated with him because I was like, the way that comes off is a lot of people, there were hundreds of hours that were spent into ensuring that you won and putting on a good case for you. And it seems like you just kind of laughed about it and like that it was a joke. And it's not how he meant it at all. But that's how both sides kind of, I think, at first interpreted it. So the second year when he went again to hearing, which is rare that a player will go back to back, the commissioner's office brought up how they basically said to the panel, they said, listen, panelists, they read the quote from like the Passon article. And they said, this guy, you guys sat here and you took time out of your day and to, be a panelist on his, to be a panelist on his hearing. And he basically walked out. You guys ruled in his favor, and he walked out and just kind of made a mockery of it. And basically, like, he didn't value your job and your time. How could you rule in favor of somebody that doesn't even take your job seriously and what you're doing, like, for the sport? And they tried to basically just use it as a way of like, it doesn't matter what his numbers say and what his value is. You can't rule for him because, he didn't take, this process seriously. And ultimately they didn't win that either. And the commissioner's office then fired his panel.
I'm learning. This is like, I'm not even kidding. I'm not exaggerating. I'm learning so much. It's probably my favorite episode.
I could talk forever about it, but
I love it because I feel like I need to know more about it. That's why I asked you. I was like, I was reading over the Boris information. I was like, this is interesting. And I am not exaggerating when I say I would do anything for Matt Chapman. So when I was reading some of that stuff, I was like, I hope I want to understand it more. And I want to teach people like, this is not only just what he's worth and everything like that, but I also know Boris was trending because of everything that was happening with Trevor's vlog and everything. So it was it's super interesting. And so obviously, like, we know how clients are, but my question is just because like I'm so rare where I make the joke, like, chicks dig the long ball, cool, home runs are cool, but I'm a sucker for like a mid infielder who's phenomenal on defense. So when you have a client like that going up against the Garrett Coles of the world, or, when Giancarlo Stanton when he got signed during the winter meetings, when you have somebody who can't be attached to these home run numbers, you're like, even Derek Jeter, despite he wasn't a powerful guy, Marcus Semien, tons of power. and you have these, and Marcus is on his way to reaching free agency. How do you deal with a mid infielder compared to what these pitchers and what the Bryce Harpers of the world are getting?
So there's a different market for it. Basically, there's like you group guys kind of on, similar players and similar kind of performance. And so there's the power hitters, and there's this like saying or this precedent basically in arbitration that power pays. So that's why guys like Chris Davis with the A's got paid, so much. He got paid so much because he
also got an extension, which never happens.
Yeah. That is true. So power pays, but then there is another kind of part of the market. It's different. And where you have the guys who are really good defenders, that's where you have like the middle infield guys. And they are the premium, like a shortstop. And then usually second base is a premium position in the infield. So they tend to be above guys like your first base guy or,
which is weird because first base, they usually have power attached to them.
So unless you are a big home run guy at first base, you will not usually make as much as your, shortstop. So luckily over the last several years, slowly we've like introduced some advanced stats into arbitration cases.
So what are those stats though?
So like WAR is, which believe it or not, that took a long time to basically.
I would say that's like an older stat.
That's where we're at. So like it took a long time to get panelists used to understanding really what WAR is, because you have an hour to make your case. And if you're using a brand new stat, you got to explain to the panelists why this stat is valuable.
And like, hey, ISO, which is a huge power stat, they'd be like, I don't like.
Exactly. Like, so yeah, we do use that one, but like the reason in the beginning it was hard too with WAR to introduce, because both sides, if it didn't play in their favor, they would always bring up this argument. Let's say you said, look, his, Fangraphs WAR is this. And then the other side, let's say you showed both. You said you showed his Fangraphs WAR is 10 and his reference WAR, his baseball reference WAR, because they use different formulas, is 9.1. Okay. The other side would just come in and listen. The other side fully understands the difference in that it's still meaningful and relevant, but they would say to the panel, how can we trust a stat that is supposed to value their wins above replacement, yet these two stats from two different sources get completely different numbers? Which one do we place value on? How do we even give value to that? We can't, so throw it out.
That's so interesting, because I know you're a lawyer, so you have to think that way, yeah. Right? You think logically, and I barely think logically because I'm such an emotional baby. But that's what's cool about it, is like you have to have the people that a spade, right? Like this is what it is.
Right. It's the funniest part is, so when you're at the union or the commissioner's office, you have to be in every single hearing. So when I was there and we had 22 hearings, which was the record number, they've never had more than that in a season. So we did 2 a day. So for 3 weeks straight, we would do 2 hearings back to back a day. It was the most exhausting 3 weeks of my life. But you would sit in there, and one side, like the commissioner's office would sit there and tell the panelists that, the arbitration, there is precedent set here that, saves matter. They're the premium, the premium stat to have, and ERA means nothing as a relief pitcher, nothing. And they will tell you, like, this has been, set, and this has been made clear in past hearings, and blah, blah, blah. And then
all the dudes in my mentions, I hope they hear this. Really do.
Oh yeah. But then 3 hours later in the next hearing, because remember you have different panelists, the commissioner's office will come in and say, everybody knows it's been made clear in arbitration that ERA matters. And we know that. And saves, yeah, they're great. But if you don't have the ERA, like, you cannot make above this amount. And it's just funny because, like, both sides, the other people, like with the MLBPA and the commissioner's office, like, you'll just be like looking at them and both sides know you just made the exact opposite argument 3 hours ago. but you have to play the game. And so you just go back and forth for 3 weeks where it's like in the morning you make one argument and you're passionate about it and you say it with conviction, and 3 hours later, in the next hearing, you make the exact opposite argument with conviction. And it's like funny because
yeah, I mean, and I get that because like mama has mood swings, but like, it's just kind of like from that perspective. That's so cool. I love this episode. This is like my favorite, but I'm like a nerd about this shit. I think it's so cool.
Well, anyone in your mentions, if they're confused about relief pitchers and what matters in arbitration, the one thing that everyone, both sides love to argue is that saves are the premium stat.
So the way that baseball is happening when starters don't get past 5 innings, would that hurt or benefit a reliever?
So innings, basically, like the way the bullpen, there's like this infamous bullpen pyramid, how you value bullpens and players that like relief pitchers. The guys that are the middle relievers are paid the least. The long innings.
Those are the unsung heroes too, for the record.
Yeah. And then you have the setup guys, the ones with a lot of holds. Those guys are like right above it. And then the closers are the top. And that in the past, at least, I don't want to say anything that's ever going to be used against me in a hearing, but that is what kind of has driven salary for relief pitchers for a while. But that's why Dellin Betances had a great case. He lost it, but they tried to make the argument that they were trying to get him paid like a closer, but the Yankees were saying he's not a closer. He doesn't have the saves to get that kind of money. He has a lot of holds, but the agents and the players were arguing, the player was arguing, look, he's got the holds, and he was just behind like Aroldis Chapman, Andrew Miller and stuff. So it was, he didn't have the opportunity to be a closer. But if you look at his WAR, he's just as valuable, if not more valuable than the closers. And his WAR indicated that, and the advanced stats did, but he lost the hearing. And it just kind of put him right back into this solidified bullpen structure or pyramid, where if you don't have the saves, you will never get paid like a closer.
So like Liam Hendricks, I know we use him a lot, but we both love Liam. But so last season, he went from a reliever to a closer because of Blake Trinan.
Yeah.
So that's just crazy. And that's the very end of the season.
And he will and so what happens is if you finish the season as a closer, he will compare himself to closers, and he will get to be in that elite kind of, upper echelon. Whereas the worst thing that could happen is if you're a closer and you lose that role in the middle of the season or at the end of the season, it's a nightmare in arbitration. And it sucks.
Okay, so that's good. So did you notice like recently, the last like couple seasons, the bullpen has been getting a lot more respect, right? I'm not used to anything above, and I feel like two-year contracts don't sound like a lot, but the relievers are the new sexy thing, right? I think Josh Hader being talked about for the Cy Young definitely helped that. So can you see that trend kind of going up with relievers are becoming the new thing? And that it's obviously because the game's changing, right? I'm old enough to remember where a guy pitched a full 9 innings.
Right.
So I feel like that's a really good thing, but shitty for starters in a way.
Yeah. So it hurts starters because nowadays we'll sit there and we'll compare guys. Like we'll say for Trevor Bauer, when we had to compare him to the only comparable guy who was in his year going through arbitration last year was David Price from 2014. And he pitched like 200 and, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 innings or something. And we had to make the distinction, like, look, Trevor pitching over 200 innings last year is way more impressive than in 2014, David Price pitching over 200 innings, because there were like over 30 players. There were over 30 starters who pitched over 200. Whereas this last year, I think there were like, I don't know, 6, 7 or something that went over 200. So, but the teams, of course, they love to use it against pitchers, even though we both know that you guys manage the game differently now. So that's not fair. I can assure you that it's going to be a long time and before really, even though we might be in reality placing a lot more value on the bullpens, it's going to be a while before bullpens actually reap those benefits in salary arbitration. They will forever, like for a long time, be paid under starters for sure.
I guess that makes sense. It's just always going to be that starters are the quarterbacks of baseball, which I get to a certain extent, and I respect it because I know how difficult it is to be a pitcher, but at the same time, I don't know, but it's crazy. Girl, this was so much fun. I love this. I know you could talk about it forever, but I was like, this is the stuff I love.
I would love to we should ask our listeners if there are other things about arbitration, because you have somewhat of an idea, obviously, like how arbitration works. I obviously like live and breathe it, but I'm wondering, like, listeners that are, listening to this,
like, did I miss out on any questions that they're curious about?
Right. Because we can totally explain those or answer those. There's tons we didn't get into anyways.
Yeah.
So.
And if you have any questions for me about like how to spell arbitration, like I got you.
Drink arbitration.
This was so much fun.
I know. I could talk about.
I'm also like realizing how much of a geek I am about this sport, because I feel like oftentimes I need to remind myself like how much I love this crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. I can geek out on arbitration.
And this was just us casually. I mean, like asking you like, hey, I would like to know a little bit more about arbitration. And you were like, let's go. And I've never like received a faster response from you on a text message in my life. And you're like, oh my God, like it was great. Cool. Well, inject this into your veins, people, because I learned so much, and that was so much fun, Rach.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad you appreciate arbitration, because
and little peekaboos from my nephew was really fun.
I know. He could have joined.
He probably could have, but he's, I'm trying to figure out like how to put him on like one of my shows. I'm going to figure it out, but
you told me to explain it to you like you were a 6-year-old or something. Like,
he's going to be 5 on New Year's Day. So that works out.
Like perfectly. That could have been perfect.
Yeah, it would have been perfect. Like explain it to me like I'm John Weston. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of Cork'd Up. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this one. And like I said, like genuinely, we've had like Delano DeShields on here, and I fell in love with him, but like this is my favorite episode. He
was on your banana boat.
He was on my banana boat, and I would never disrespect somebody on my banana boat. So, but like you also were, so we're still in the running for that. So cheers to this episode of Cork'd Up, and we will see you next time.
Cheers.